score, how is this regulated? So, Koen, I think this one is relating to that great, I don't know what you call it, situation where water and Coke Zero get rated as a higher nutrient drink than whole milk. So maybe if I were to also add to this question, Koen, and open it to the rest of the panel then, is how can we influence these scientific panels to take a better look at what they're looking at? Because if they're just going from an algorithm, clearly they're making bad choices and sharing those bad choices with the public.
Yeah. Maybe first to address the question on top, it's about the eco-score. It's a voluntary system, so there are people really working internationally on standardizing the, let's say, the calculation of the eco-score. It is quite transparent. It's based for, let's say, about maybe 80% on the life cycle assessment outcome. But for 20%, there are 4, let's say, elements also, and I'm not sure if I can have them all. It's more related to the sustainability of the origin of the production method, sustainability of packaging, and one more. So you can get bonus malus points for each of them. And then the eco-score pops out. And it's pretty transparent, described how this comes to a score at the end, so you could check it. It's now being piloted by some retailers in Europe, so some of them will put it in their, let's say, food information. France is already ahead of other countries, I would say, in general, on the eco-score. So that's currently the situation with the eco-score, and it's, as I said, to answer the question, it's a voluntary system. About Nutri-Score, same story. It's pretty transparent. So, for example, for milk, it's now placed in the category of beverages. So you can download an Excel file and you can put in all the required, I would say, nutrients like energy and protein and salt and other constituents of the food product, and then the Nutri-Score rolls out. That is a kind of an algorithm, as I showed, that has been developed by a scientific panel. And then indeed, with any model, any scoring system that is developed, of course, scientists are sitting around, but sometimes you have to make political choices. And you have to be on top of it as industry to have some influence on that. So usually when these kind of methodologies are developed, they also will ask advice of stakeholders from the industry to advise. Retailers can be an advisory, food processors can be an advisory, let's say, a group. And there you can influence it. So you really have to be on top of it to influence it. And as I said, you already notice it from the slide that I produced. You can be pretty cynical sometimes about the outcome. Is it really adding or contributing to what the Nutri-Score intends to do, a more healthy, a more nutritious, let's say, choice of consumers for food products? So I have sometimes my doubts about these scores.
Yeah, Brian, I see you've wanted something to share too.
Just to build on that, I think one of the real challenges we have is those in the human nutrition field wanting to act responsibly in their own mind, and even in countries' dietary guidelines, we're starting to see sustainability creep into that. Not about nutrition, it's more about environment, and their way of solving that is by reducing animal source foods in the diet because they're doing their bit for the environment, not about the nutrition of society. And I think we, as an industry, have work to do, because the other part of this is that I've got the opportunity to review a review document done for the Nordic dietary guidelines, done by an organisation called Chatham House. Some of you may know it, and they pick up on one study. They don't do the meta-analysis that was talked about, and then we've got the other challenges. We're finding really obscure papers published in strange journals that aren't recognised that get picked up on because it's been published. So I look to our academic colleagues to my right here and say, how can we make sure the right science gets published in the right journals, and then how do we bring that together as an industry to go and influence these other initiatives, well-meaning initiatives that are sometimes slightly ill-informed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. So, Brian, this next question is for you, too. So, the questions about incentive for farmers or processors to join the dairy sustainability framework. So maybe just explain a little bit about who those members are that you talked about so that we can get some familiarity there.
Great question. Thank you. I didn't load that one either. That's great. Look, membership in DSF is free, and we are really unique in the dairy sector compared to other livestock sectors. We have daily contact between our producer and our customer, the dairy processor, whereas other industries, as a sheep producer, I might see my customer twice a year, and they could be a different customer each year. So we're really lucky in that we're able to build programs with our suppliers. So our members tend to be dairy co-ops and processors. We do have others. We have individual co-ops. We have some individual farmers, but they tend to be dairy processors who go through this process and put in place a program, as we've seen some great examples today, of improvement programs based on that materiality analysis that Koen was referring to that we ask our members to do. So it pulls through. DSF is about a process. It's not just picking what's nice and easy and we can do it. It's picking about what's materially relevant to the business that we're working in and how can we pull that through the value chain and report progress. And back to Liz's points, one thing I would encourage you all to do if you're taking these actions on farm or you're working with farmers who are taking these actions on farm, challenge those who are doing the carbon footprinting to make sure that the actions you're doing are picked up in those calculations. Often at tier 2, tier 2 is a wide range thing, isn't it? So often countries are at tier 1 where you get a number of animals multiplied by an emission factor. Whatever action you take, you don't get picked up on. So make sure the calculators that your auditors are using will pick up the great actions you're doing on farm and get rewarded that way. So membership, dairy processors, putting a program in place. We do have what's called aggregating membership, where sometimes we have the National Dairy Association aggregate on behalf of the whole country. So France, Australia, Ireland, US are all aggregating members, where I get one number for each of the criteria from that country.
Great, thank you, Brian. I see the order has changed, but I'm going to ask the one that was sitting up here longer. So this is for everybody. So sometimes seems what we have to do to reduce emissions in a dairy farm. Will reduce the emissions globally, but locally society do not like to see confined herds, manure lagoons, how to deal with that. So as we think about different systems, like you were talking about, Liz, and I think you mentioned this too, Brian, that it's no one system is the answer, but some of these choices for more efficient production do challenge the different kind of criteria that people have in their heads. So whoever wants to pick that one up first, I can jump right on.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just about every individual farmer doing something better to be more efficient, or doing what they can do, and also making sure it's profitable as well. So if they're going to end up spending a lot of money and put themselves out of business, then of course that's not sustainable for them. But I think it comes back to what you were saying as well, Brian. It's about communication of the good that is being done. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about indeed also awareness and getting the good data out. Just as an example, we just did an analysis on the phosphorus excretion of organic versus conventional farms. And I'm not in favor of any system as such. It's just that the outcome was conventional farms have a better phosphorus efficiency. And when I talked to my, the overall funders, they all had the impression, we need to go to organic farming because that must be better. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of opening eyes and get some real data out there. And sometimes, yes, it clashes with your perception. In this case, it was very clear. But very often it's a matter of that that you have to strike a balance between, say, animal welfare, better animal welfare, and accept that that goes together with a greater excretion. Now, that's a difficult message to public, but in the end, it's something, as a scientist, that I feel we have to talk about and get the message across.
Yeah, that basically goes across species, I would say. So that there is a clear trade-off between choice of welfare concept, of welfare system, and emissions. You see that all across the species. If you have an organic chicken, it has a 30 to 40% higher carbon footprint than, let's say, the normal conventional systems. And the welfare choice, you see that now in the European, Northwest European market, that the leading first choice of consumers is the welfare concept, also of retail, depending on what the market share is of each concept. And within a specific welfare system, farmers start to optimize their, I would say, other sustainability parameters like the carbon footprint. So it is clear that with a welfare system like organic farming is very much also focused on welfare to a large extent, that you will have your trade-offs in emissions and efficiency. That's a choice.
Just to build on that, and I think it's something we need to go back to, I think with our R&D activity, and you guys can argue with me, you know that, but we've become very specialist, and I think now what we need is that systems approach in everything, or we've always needed it, whether that's multidisciplinary teams or individual projects having that wider scope to make sure we pick up on those trade-offs and we're looking at the alternatives and we understand where they are. Because if we don't do that, we end up in that situation where people pick up on one paper and say, this is the same everywhere. And we've just got to try and widen the recipient's knowledge base.
Thanks. Liz, Jan, what are the unit values should we use when evaluating mitigation strategies, methane yield versus methane intensity? So question around, so how do you measure this stuff, right? So like you can measure it on intensity of the milk, which is informative and certainly can help with decision making, but that doesn't always match up with the total yield of methane. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And again, there's no clear-cut answer to this one, obviously. But it's really important to understand the advantage, disadvantage of each of those metrics that are listed there. Like having a low methane emission per unit of feed. Hey, yeah, if that coincides with a low digestibility or something, obviously you don't want that. Methane emissions per unit of milk. That all goes under the assumption that the total production stays the same and that you can then have with a lower methane yield per unit of milk. But if farmers in total increase the number of animals or the number of milk production, we're still not having the response we want. Okay. So we shouldn't look at basically units or metrics on its own. You should make a proper balance. And sometimes that is a balance, like I talked about nitrogen. Sometimes it's a very local balance, like the nitrogen intensity in regions in the Netherlands, especially close to nature areas, is simply too high. And then we can make a very high efficiency per unit of milk, but if it's close to a nature area, you're still screwed. So it depends on which metrics to use in which situation, and usually, unfortunately, there's no one clear-cut answer that solves everything.
Yeah, and real I think that's an interesting connection too, because nitrogen, phosphorus, kind of local concerns, but methane, that doesn't just stay in one spot, right?
Yeah.
So if you're reducing methane in one area, but it's making other areas have to increase their methane, not really winning, right?
No, that's true. So I see sometimes methane expressed per unit of hectare, and then some farms saying we have less methane per hectare. To me, that's indeed a little bit less useful, whereas I do see the interest in having nitrogen per hectare in the sense that on that hectare, you have too much nitrogen, losses of NO3, nitrate, etc. But it's always looking at the whole full world scale, global scale, and we need to produce food for all human beings. And in the end, therefore, its metric per unit of product has its merits as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we need to always reinforce, is that there's a reason why we're making milk. It's not just to have methane being pumped in the air. Liz, this one's for you. So giving more milk to calves, you make higher yield calves, right? Giving that more milk to calves also reduce the footprint of milk in a long term. If the person who asked that question wants to clarify that, let me know, but I'll try to paraphrase that a little bit for you, Liz. So with the long-term, short-term strategies that you laid out, I believe the age at first calving was at the back end, but maybe this question is also, are there some benefits from a carbon footprint standpoint that we can get early on and not have to wait until that calf becomes a cow?
Yeah, so definitely in terms of the health. So much of the research and stuff that Javier showed was around health of the calf as well. It's not all just about production. So if we have less mortality, for example, we have healthier calves growing better, then that will in turn start to gradually reduce the replacement rates. But yeah, of course, if we're feeding more milk to the animals, milk replacer may have a high footprint per kilo, per ton. When you feed that to the animal, the impact of the actual milk replacer is relatively small in the whole pie chart, and then the benefits you get per kilo of milk are actually really big. So that's what we must consider.
Thank you, Liz. This question is for Jan, I think. So milk urea levels, what should be the target for optimal nitrogen efficiency in milk production? I think the graph that you showed, or the chart you showed, indicated that there might not be one.
Yeah, there isn't one. Milk urea is a crude approximator of milk nitrogen efficiency. So I see farms in the Netherlands that have milk urea of 20 that are highly efficient and others 15 that are not efficient. And there's so many elements in milk urea that determine the level, like the mineral level of the diet that will dilute urea, the moment of feeding compared with milking, because urea in the mammary gland can go both ways, right? So it's a matter of at what time do I feed, what time do I milk, etc. So there's no one clear-cut answer to it all. It's just that if on your farm, your own farm, you change a certain dietary management and milk urea is decreased, that's a kind of indication that you do better in milk nitrogen efficiency, but don't necessarily use it to compare farms, because different farms have different levels of standard urea in there. I see that also, that's nice, in Dutch farmers, a couple of years ago, they said, don't go below 20, that's really, you can't do that. And nowadays we're already much closer to, you can well go below 20, but don't go below 15 or something. Okay, so that's already kind of changing what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, and I hope farmers are aware of this issue of nitrogen and how to deal efficiently with nitrogen. As like I said, there are many different ways to do that more efficiently. Milk urea on your farm is a kind of good indicator. I don't so much like to use it to compare farms.
Thank you. Jan, this one's also for you. Are there human health concerns when handling bovaer in feed mills?
If I'm correct, according to EFSA, there are indications that you need to wear gloves and protective masks with it. It is approved by EFSA, so to me that means that given the conditions that EFSA stipulates, it apparently is safe. I'm nowhere near an expert on that one, so I'm just relying here on what EFSA tells us. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that would be our assessment of it too when we did our safety reviews of the product. So yeah, have to have the right safety equipment in place in order to handle it properly, just like we have to with other ingredients that we handle in premix facilities. Koen, this one is for you. How big is the risk for competition on byproducts between feed and biofuel or electricity?
Yeah, good question. That risk is pretty high. I would say it's actually an existing dilemma at the moment in the market. The European Union has a kind of a green gas target overall to produce more green gas in today and in the near future. And biogas producers are basically driven also because of legislation to produce more gas and use, of course, more biomass in their anaerobic digesters to produce that specific, to reach that target. And it's also pushing valuable, I would say, co-products from the food industry into anaerobic digesters. It's, of course, also a market, let's say, a mechanism. What is the price that is paid by farmers to use these valuable co-products, or what is the price paid by the biogas producers, I would say. But in general, it doesn't make sense from a circularity point of view, and it doesn't make sense for an efficient resource use point of view. And there's quite a bit of lobbying work, I can tell you at the moment, going on to, let's say, restrict or prohibit the use of valuable nutritional co-products for biogas production. But it's not yet regulated, so I hope there will be some restrictions in the near future, because it doesn't make sense.
Right. Jan, how are the nitrogen and phosphorus ceilings enforced in the Netherlands? there's some questions about that, but maybe it's easier for you just to share.
Yeah, it's basically for the whole country.
Okay.
But even in years when you are above it, there's no direct action. In this case, it's stipulated by European Union, and basically that means the European Union will take action if they feel it's on multiple years, it's too far above this level. And you see that happening now in the Netherlands, that we will lose the derogation completely, and that's basically because the European Union feels that we as a country haven't done enough to get nitrate levels in the water down, for example, and there's too much questions of fraud with manure, for example, and they simply don't allow us anymore to go down, even though I have to say, from science, I'm also a member of the National Manure Committee Act in the Netherlands. From science, we said, no, it's quite okay to use more manure than the 170 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare that the EU says, right? We can prove that scientifically. It's a political issue, and yeah, you know how those things goes. Are you well envisioned, with the EU or not? And at the moment we are not, and it's very strict. So I expect EU to take measures when they see that we will stay above this level, and then obviously you pay heavy fines, and the government probably doesn't want to do that, so then they take even more action. And I always say as to the farmer organizations, please do take action yourself, because that's better than if someone above is going to dictate you what to do. But this is the tragedy of the commons, individual farms, and how to do it on a national level, right? So that's the difficult bit.
I've shown you one slide for manure technology that was basically splitting manure into a nitrogen-rich fraction. And by doing that, you can basically place the remaining manure, more of the manure at your land, and sell the nitrogen product as a kind of alternative for chemical fertilizer. That's a way for farmers to get out of this, or at least to solve this issue that Jan was just explaining. But it also needs approval from it at quite a long way in the European Union before it was approved, and it still is with some limitations there, the use of manure in the market. But these kind of technologies definitely will help us to solve some of these issues.
Koen, this one's for you. You mentioned protein from animal-originated food and from vegetables. In the requirement of people, we just talk about protein. Where in the discussion is, I'm going to assume that the rest of that is the rest of the nutrients that we get in those feeds. Like when I think about milk, yeah, we talk about the protein a lot as an industry, but there's so much more in milk that should give it more weight.
Yep. This is really very much a sustainability-driven question, I would say, to talk about, okay, should the protein come from animal source food or should the protein come from plant protein? This is very much also, I've shown you already the Lancet publication with the planetary health diet. It had quite a bit of influence in let's say, in the market and in let's say, society in general. So it's very much sustainability driven, but also from a human nutrition quality point of view, it is, as I said, animal source protein is highly consistent, highly digestible, highly available. So you see also some medical practitioners, if you really talk about kind of a consistent and adequate protein supply, for example, to children, to elderly, who need more protein on a daily basis than adults on a body weight basis, kilogram body weight basis, or people that are top sport, for example, exercising a lot, or people that are recovering from, let's say, some medical issues. They really are in favor of animal source food instead of vegetable protein. Of course, a vegan person can survive. They have shown that already. So it's not as strictly needed as I said, but it really facilitates the protein supply of humans to have some animal source food in the diet. I'm not sure if that's answering the question.
No, I think it probably did, Koen.
Okay.
And if it didn't, then please speak up. Jan, this one's for you. So it looks like some technologies available to reduce methane emissions affect negatively in some way dry matter intakes. So for the future, we have to accept that our cows' efficiency will drop in a way to keep enteric methane emissions lower in a herd. Is that... So I think maybe what that might be saying is that it looks like a lot of those... I think you get it, so go ahead.
There are dangers, especially if you... I've shown it for nitrate or for 3-NOP. Yeah, that's true. If it goes too high, feed intake will drop. And you see in those short-term experiments that milk production doesn't necessarily drop, but it's there. That's why it's so important, and we lack that. Long-term experiments to know exactly on the longer term, do we also get a drop in milk production or simply using temporarily body reserves, for example. I think you should, in general, just as a rule of thumb, restrict the level of those additives to a certain level that you don't have a drop in feed intake and milk production. If you do, you get that other issue of dilution of maintenance concept, right? And being less efficient with your feeds, which has, as Liz also showed, negative effects on in the end, the carbon footprint. So it's a balance, and therefore we can't always achieve the highest levels of methane reduction that perhaps you would like because of too much negative effects indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Brian?
Just add something on that. Ultimately, I mean, we were talking about emissions intensity earlier. Ultimately, we've got to reduce absolute emissions, and that is less cows. So how do we increase the productivity of the cows we've got as opposed to adding cows? And that's our challenge in the emerging dairy world at the moment. Yeah. They're not food secure. They're still developing their industries. And in fact, we argued with the Green Climate Fund for the argument that they would only fund projects that had immediate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And we said, well, actually, for some of these regions, their emissions need to go up before they can come down. They've got to establish their industries. Let's give them a chance. And they've accepted that. But I think ultimately, and my slide where it says size matters, we always want to have more cows. Well, actually, let's try and find that happy medium, as Liz was saying, about the efficiency, having less cows but producing the same volume. And Peter Tuborg, from CEO of Arla Foods, tells a great story in Denmark where I think between 1940s and now, they have half the number of cows they used to have, same milk output. That's the type of story we should be telling, because that's how we reduce those absolute emissions, which we need to do.
So, Brian, I'm curious if you talk about you were able to convince them that what they wanted is not going to be something that they're going to be able to see. And so if they really want to solve this problem, emissions are going to have to go up before they can come down. How did you go about convincing them to do that?
It's a guy called Donald Moore who convinced them. Look, we had to, and look, I said earlier, we also raised $3.5 million just to do the application for the Green Climate Fund. A huge amount of work needs to go into this. And the other part of that story is we also got them to consider that it's also about livelihoods. It's not just about greenhouse gas emissions reduction. There's a whole, as we've been saying all morning, it's the interconnectedness of all these different bits. And that's what they've accepted. And they've accepted that, yes, okay, maybe there won't be an immediate drop in greenhouse gas emissions, but that has to be the ultimate goal, which is our ultimate goal. But how do we help these industries evolve in a sustainable way where they're increasing their output, but not by more cows? It's easily done there if we can get the feeding right. They've got the genetics.
Sure.
It's how do we give them the right fuel?
Yes.
Yeah, I have one question.
Oh, hold on, Kevin.
I had one question, maybe directed to Jan. I'm very curious to understand your opinion on the future of carbon credits as an incentive to move the industry in the right direction. And then adjunct to that is, if we sell that credit to Taylor Swift to use to run her jet, have we really accomplished anything?
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so I'll probably tread on some toes here again. I see a lot of kind of those companies that certify carbon credits in a way that are scientifically just rubbish. I just put it there. So that's my first point, is we can't get carbon credit systems to just, with due respect, a bunch of companies. We need someone with good scientific background to oversee it and allow those things to happen. That's one. The second one is then, in a carbon credit system, you have to make decisions on how to weigh the different greenhouse gases that Brian was also talking about, the global warming star way or the traditional way, and all of them had advantages, disadvantages. Again, there's no good or bad one, and that means that you come up with your example of Taylor Swift in a plane. Yeah, indeed, that means it's a matter of, if you do it on the GUP 100, it may be good, but in real life, because methane is short-lived, etc., it's no good. Ooh, and that's such a difficult question, because GUP 100 is a metric that kind of can be understood and applied by politicians, but it's not necessarily the best one. And in the end, you want to go to that metric that best predicts this additional warming, this global temperature increase impact. So a very difficult issue on those carbon credit schemes. Yes, I agree here. Many different angles on that one.
Ryan.
Let me just build on that a bit. And this is part of the work we're doing for the industry about, there's row crop farmers in the US who are selling credits currently to Microsoft, aren't they? Microsoft looks wonderful. Yeah. Agriculture is still the polluter. So one of the key drivers behind this work is, how do we come up with a way to say, okay, agriculture generated these credits and they should be recognised for that and not just be called the polluter. So we can't double count. That's the big issue. We can't double count, but what we've got to say is, okay, Microsoft's benefiting from agriculture, but we generated this. The challenge is, do we really want to sell them out of our value chains? Because most of our value chains will need them as what I'd call insets or internal credits, whatever you want to call them, to survive. Otherwise, the dairy processor's got to go out onto the open market and buy credits to meet their ambitious targets. They've all set ambitious targets. I'm usually the one that gets the phone call when a company's made ambitious targets and they've got a year until they have to report, and they're saying, shit, what do we do now? We've got to get better at doing this. And I work with dairy companies now on these protocols. And when you mention some of these organisations offering credits, they shudder because they're so scared of being accused of greenwash. We cannot afford it. And even if one company gets accused of greenwash, all companies suffer. So we're working on this together to try and find robust protocols where, if they're sold, we still get recognition. The farmer isn't liable at the end of the day. You read the fine print in some of these things. And make sure that if they can be in the value chain, we in the value chain need to come up with attractive offers as well, because what the co-ops tell me is, we're not going to tell farmers what to do, we're going to give them choice, but we're going to do it on a solid protocol. They can sell them as credits or we keep them as insets. How that's managed is the farmer's business. They do agree that it's in everyone's best interest that farmers are profitable because they need them. So I hope that builds a bit. But it's a messy, murky world out there. And when I talk to others about this, I say, who's coming up with these protocols? I say, oh, the NGOs are working on it now. Why aren't we in that tent? Why are we out here and there deciding our rules? And that's why we're doing this work.
Any other questions from the audience? No, I think we can maybe wrap it up then. Chantel, looks like you've got some gift baggies. So I'd like to thank our panelists for this morning. Let's give them another round of applause, please.